Okay, so first up, I gotta admit, I've been looking forward to this movie for a long time. Apocalypse has to be one of my favourite villains of the X-Men franchise, ever since I first saw him during the X-Men Legends game for the PS2. In fact, I think I still have that game. Hang on a minute, let me see. Here we go, X-Men Legends 2, Rise of Apocalypse. This is an awesome video game, probably my favourite Marvel or even comic book video game altogether. And 90% of that comes from the fact that it's got Apocalypse in it. He's an awesome villain and an amazing character, and I've been looking forward to seeing him in a movie for years now, at least 10 years. So, yeah, I've been looking forward to this. But without further ado, let's get into the review itself. So it's finally the 18th of May, and X-Men Apocalypse is at long last in the theatres. I've just been to a midnight screening of the movie, and this is me literally just through the door, just written down my thoughts on the movie, and I need to talk about it with you guys. I need to speak about this movie. It is so good. Now, before I start this review, I'm just going to say, if you haven't seen the movie, I do recommend going to see it. If you're at all interested in comic book movies or X-Men movies, or even just general action movies, this is well worth the price of admission. It's a really well-made movie, and it's definitely worth seeing at least once in the cinema. I'm going to see it a couple more times while it's still in the theatres. If you get the chance, go and see it in 3D. That is definitely something that is worth paying the extra for. It really adds to the quality of the movie, and a lot of the effects do depend on the 3D space being used. So I'm just going to warn you right now, I'm not going to avoid spoilers in this review, although I will try and keep my discussion of the plot to a minimum. I don't particularly want to spoil any of the big story moments from it, but I'm also not going to dance around them either. I've already given my recommendation here, so if you truly don't care about having the story spoiled for you, proceed at your own caution. So with that out of the way, let's talk about this movie. First, we got to talk about the window dressing, the soundtrack, the effects, and the fight scenes. First off, the soundtrack. It is absolutely awesome. It ranges from primal, tribal music to denote Apocalypse's scenes where he's kind of mystical and you're not too sure of his origins or the limits of his power. And then it ranges all the way to these booming orchestral soundtracks when it's going through the fight scenes to really underline the epicness of the scenes that you're watching. And then you've also got a few retro pop songs popping up, which are really well used to highlight character moments. A special shout out goes to use of Sweet Dreams by the Eurythmics. That is an absolutely wonderful 5 minutes of your life that you won't quickly forget. The effects, like I said, are good. If you can see it in 3D, it's well worth doing so. It really does enhance some of the scenes. There's particular bits where there's a lot of stuff flying through the air. Having that extra dimension to the movie really does enhance it. I will say the movie is very heavily reliant on computer graphics, but to be honest, when you're dealing with mutant powers like this, you can't easily represent them with practical effects. So, of course, a lot of computer work is going to be used. But it doesn't feel out of place, doesn't feel overly fake in any way. There's no particular instances that I can think of where there was an effect that you just look at and go, wow, that was bad. It all looked good. There are some very impressive uses of CG, like when you're dealing with Angel's wings, or when Magneto's using his powers, or the Quicksilver scenes. All of those are really well done. Next up are the fight scenes, which are awesome. We get to see some really clever and unique uses of the different mutant powers, especially Angel, Nightcrawler, and Magneto. Those seem to be the most impressive displays of power that I've seen. You've got some awesome high-octane set pieces where the fights take place that really are memorable and show an impressive amount of coordination. So anyway, with those parts out of the way, let's talk about the true heart of any comic book movie, which is going to be the characters. On the side of the X-Men, you've got 7 major players. You've got Charles Xavier, you've got Mystique, you've got Nightcrawler, you've got Jean Grey, you've got Cyclops, you've got Beast, you've got Quicksilver. This is a good mix of classic characters from the previous movies and some reimaginings of characters we've seen in the alternate timeline, but these are the new versions of them to show that this is a different universe. First up, James McAvoy returns as Charles Xavier, and I'm just going to say outright, he's the best Professor X that we've had. He definitely outstrips Patrick Stewart in this role. He really does pull off the role of kindly mentor, inspirational leader, and an icon of hope for what the species of mutants can be. The movie makes good use of Xavier, making him the emotional centre of the team, as well as keeping him important in key situations within the plot. There's never any point where he feels sort of surplus to requirements in any way. Next up, we have Mystique, played by the lovely Jennifer Lawrence. As always, she puts in a good performance, and she's also a very powerful complement to McAvoy's Xavier. It is clear that her role has been somewhat shaped by Lawrence's success as Katniss from the Hunger Games. She's definitely playing more of a sort of militaristic style character, a bit more of an inspirational leader and a warrior. But she does pull it off well. She's certainly not the central character of the movie like she was in Days of Future Past, but she's still a key character to the movie, and she's used very well in the course of this plot. We also have the return of Beast, played again by Nicholas Hoult. Now, once again, this part is played very well, especially when he's under the guise of Hank McCoy, when he's still human-looking. I do have a bit of a problem with the appearance that he has when he's Beast. I'm a bit more used to the sort of hulking, slightly brutish exterior that the character has in the cartoons and comics, which is hiding this intellect behind it that you don't expect. The version that we get in the movies here is still just a little too human in shape. He's too small, too scrawny, if you know what I mean. He just looks like a fairly average guy wearing a blue Halloween werewolf mask, to be honest. And I really wish they would bulk up Beast when he's in actual blue form, so that he actually looks like something more like what the comics and cartoons had. But I will admit this is a nitpick. It's a personal preference of mine, and it doesn't impact the character in any way. It doesn't detract from the character. And the last mutant returning from previous movies to stand by the X-Men is Quicksilver. Clearly a runaway hit from Days of Future Past, who's been given an expanded role in this movie. There's more character development there. There's slightly more information given about his past. We get clear confirmation that he is Magneto's son, and that plays a part in the character's arc throughout the movie. I'm very glad to see him returning, and I am happy to see that he is having a more expanded role. And Evan Peters really brings a lot to the character. And of course, you bet your ass we get another slow-mo scene like we did in Days of Future Past. But this one is even more expanded, and if anything, I think this one is even better done. It's a much more entertaining moment, but at the same time, it feels more epic. It's a more impressive display of his power. And it's definitely a scene that is going to stick with you by the end of the movie. So in addition to these returning heroes, we've got a few new faces on the team. We have Sophie Turner taking the role of Jean Grey and playing that very well. We also have Ty Sheridan turning up as Scott Summers, or Cyclops, and Cody Schmidt-McPhee, who is playing Nightcrawler. All three of these play their roles very well, and it's nice to see a reimagining of these characters. And it's good to see them younger and revamped, and definitely different in this timeline to the versions that we had in the previous movies. I really enjoyed this version of Nightcrawler. We got to see some impressive uses of his power. We don't quite get anything like the initial moments of X-Men 2. We don't have that attack on the White House style focus on the character. But what we do get with him is very enjoyable. And in addition to those scenes with his powers, we've also got some good comic relief coming from him, which I really enjoyed and really did lighten the mood of the movie. In addition to this, with Sophie Turner as Jean Grey, we get a tiny glimpse of a potential Phoenix storyline along the road. We get little glimpses of her power, hints that there's more there, and then there is one scene towards the climax of the movie where we really get to see her unleashed. And yeah, there are flames around her, there's a definite sort of bird motif going on, so I think they are sort of building up that Dark Phoenix storyline once again. I'm not sure how I feel about them potentially rehashing that compared to what they did with X-Men 1, 2 and 3, but they could go in a different direction with the story. There are plenty of ways that the Phoenix is played into the comics and cartoons. All of those would be interesting to see. So I'm happy to go with it and see where this is going to play out. So, X-Men aside, we've got a couple of other minor characters. We do have the minor X-Men of Jubilation Lee, or Jubilee, as she likes to be known. She doesn't do much in the movie. We don't get to see any of her powers. I wonder if maybe that was a deleted scene or something. But it's still nice to see her there. It's nice to see her actually realised as a movie character, and potentially we could see more with her in future installments. She seemed like a nice character in the movie, and she was definitely interacting with the other younger mutants. In addition to that, we've got two more returning characters of note. We've got Alex Summers, who is, of course, Scott Summers' older brother, and one of the mutants from First Class. So it's nice to see him coming back, and he does play an important part in the movie. And the other character coming back is also from First Class, and that is Moira McTaggart, played by Rose Byrne. She returns to sort of teach the X-Men where to find Apocalypse. She's the person investigating Apocalypse when he's revived, and she's able to give that information to Xavier. Of course, at the end of First Class, she has her memory erased by Xavier, and that plays a certain part in the relationship between her and the Professor. And also, quite surprisingly, she serves as a romantic interest for Professor X, which I wasn't expecting them to do, but it definitely works, and it adds to the character. And it's a nice thing to see Professor Xavier, someone who we wouldn't normally see with a romantic relationship. He's actually getting one in this movie. So, moving on from the X-Men, we've got to consider our villains of the movie. So first off, we've got Apocalypse, or, as his mother likes to refer to him, En Sabanur. He's played by Oscar Isaac, and I am happy to say that this is a very good version of the character. I really enjoyed this portrayal of him. I felt like he was very threatening, very intimidating. They get across the idea of him being very powerful, but also very manipulative and very self-serving at the same time. And they really do give a convincing idea that this is an actual threat, not just to the X-Men, but to humanity as a whole, to mutant kind, to the entire planet. This guy could actually wipe out everything, and he doesn't particularly care if he does. If anything gets killed, so be it. It's survival of the strongest, and if you die, then you had what's coming to you. You weren't strong enough. And I like the fact that that aspect of the character has survived this adaptation. It was very key to Apocalypse's character that he held this sort of motto, or this sort of central idea of survival of the fittest, of always culling the weak, of always the strong must survive and the weak must serve the strong. So this whole central theme of the character being about survival of the fittest definitely survives and is very present within him at this moment in time. And I'm very happy to see that. I'm happy to see that that aspect of him stayed faithful to the comic books. His mutant powers are absolutely fascinating to watch. It's established that he's sort of hopped from body to body over the thousands of years that he's lived, and every time he possesses another mutant's body, he gains their powers and sort of takes that with him when he hops to the next body, and that plays an important part in the plot. And I have to admit, we actually see some pretty brutal deaths at his hands, based on what his powers are able to do. There are some pretty gruesome deaths in this movie, to be honest, and I'm glad they weren't shying away from that, shying away from what somebody with this kind of power could really do. And I'm also glad that he didn't take a back seat to the Four Horsemen. For a moment there, what I thought they were going to do was have him establish himself in charge, recruit the Four Horsemen, and then they'd do all the heavy lifting, and he'd just sort of sit back, and then he'd turn up in the final 5 minutes of the movie to fight the X-Men once his horsemen had been defeated. But no, he actually plays an equal role in all of the activities going on. He has the power to do something, so he's going to do it. He's not just going to sit back and let someone else do it. If he has the strength to accomplish something, he's going to go ahead and get it done. And that, I feel, is really true to the character. He's not somebody like the Emperor who's just going to sit back and let the dragons deal with it. You know, all his lieutenants and stuff. He's not going to leave things in their hands when he can help ensure victory. And that makes him more of a threatening character, I think. It really does build up what an expert villain he is and just how much of a threat he is to the heroes. So I'm really glad to see that, because it feels to me like all is as it should be with Apocalypse. I think this is a really faithful adaptation of the character. So moving on from Apocalypse, we've got his Four Horsemen, the foremost among them being Magneto. Magneto is, once again, played by Michael Fassbender. And again, much like McAvoy, I think that Fassbender is the better Magneto. I think he's much better than Ian McKellen, to be honest. He brings a lot more emotion to the character, and he has that really good chemistry both with Jennifer Lawrence and with James McAvoy. You can really believe that these three people were once friends, but now they're on either side of this ideological divide, and it's really tragic that they have been separated like this because they were such good friends before. So Fassbender really owns the role of Magneto in this movie and brings some emotionally powerful moments, but also some very satisfying conclusions to his arc. So we also get Storm, played by Alexandra Shipp. She doesn't do too much in the movie, to be honest, other than just being a bad guy that the X-Men need to face. But she does have an arc. It's established her sort of need for something more, her humble origins, and Apocalypse comes along and offers something more to her. And we get to see her getting her powers sort of supercharged to the point where she's able to control entire weather systems. Like I said, she doesn't do too much in the movie other than fight the X-Men, but what little she does have is actually a complete arc, and it's a very satisfying story for the character, ultimately bringing her story to a close and making it ready for her to tell new stories with the character. In addition to her, we have Ben Hardy playing the Horseman of Death, also known as the Mutant Angel, or should it be Archangel now? Not entirely sure. Let's check what X-Men Legends has to say.
Angel, come forth and meet your master.
The name Angel no longer applies.
What would you have us call you?
I am Archangel, a horseman of Apocalypse, and I am yours to command.
Your speed and strength have been augmented. But what of your soul?
My soul is filled with hatred, rage, and death for the X-Men.
Okay, Archangel it is. Either way, this version of Angel is way better than the one we got in The Last Stand. The effects on the wings are much more convincing, and he actually feels like a mutant who could fight in the kind of battles that the X-Men have, whereas the old version could fly and that was it. This one actually, his wings are weapons. He is able to use them like that, and once he gets upgraded by Apocalypse, he becomes that much more threatening. But because of this, he's a much better version of Angel, who has a lot more to do in the plot and has his powers way better demonstrated in the battles at the end of the movie. And the last of the Horsemen is the Horseman of Pestilence, which is the mutant Psylocke, played by Olivia Munn. Again, a very minor role. She's basically just a blunt instrument who's thrown against the X-Men to try and slow them down. I have to admit, I heard that Miss Munn actually refused a role in the Deadpool movie because she believed that taking the role of Psylocke here would be a much more sort of significant, much more prestigious role. Gotta say, I think she made a misstep there. I think that was the wrong choice because definitely Psylocke is very minor in this movie. She's one of the least used characters of the main cast, to be perfectly honest. Like I said, she's basically just a blunt instrument that's used against the X-Men. Doesn't have that much dialogue, certainly no memorable lines or anything like that. She's kind of set up that she's going to be a returning villain. We have a scene towards the end where she's seen sort of walking away with a look in her eyes like, this ain't finished, this ain't over yet, I'm going to be back. I don't know if they're going to bring the character back. It depends on fan reaction, I suppose. I can't imagine too many fans going that mental over this version of Psylocke. Maybe if they change her up in future movies, give her a bit more to do, and just sort of establish her more as a powerful character, make her a bit meatier in the story, you know? Maybe then the fans will be a bit more happy to have her back, but as it is at the moment, I can't see her being a staple of the franchise. But like I said, there's already set up work there for her to return, so we'll see what happens there in future movies. Maybe it'll turn out good, I'm not sure. And finally, we have a couple of cameo characters. We have the character of William Stryker, once again played by the same actor as he was played by in Days of Future Past. And of course, we've got Hugh Jackman appearing in his mandatory cameo as Wolverine. He's only on screen for 5 minutes, maybe something like that, and he doesn't say a word. A lot of his scene is basically just set up for the third Wolverine movie. It kind of establishes how he gets out of the Weapon X program, how he escapes from it and goes wild, basically, goes on the loose. I will say a good thing about this scene is it's essentially erased all trace of X-Men Origins now. Because, yeah, between this and Deadpool and Days of Future Past, X-Men Origins no longer exists, which I guess is a net positive. So yeah, these cameos, they're fairly minor and incidental to the plot, but they do have that setup for Wolverine 3, which I believe is going to be Old Man Logan, I think they're talking about going for. But I'll talk more about the setup for Wolverine 3 at the end, because we have to talk about the post-credits scene for that. So, with the characters out of the way, let's talk plot. The movie starts off back in ancient Egypt several thousand years ago, during the height of Apocalypse's power. It starts off with a sort of ritual going on, which is how Apocalypse transfers his consciousness from one body to another, and he's basically trying to transfer from his dying body into a body that can actually heal, like Wolverine can. So it's quite a significant turning point for him, because it's said that once he moves into this body, he will become immortal. However, during the course of the ritual, his subjects actually rise up against him and begin attacking the pyramid that he's in, and they end up collapsing it on top of him, and he's unable to revive. But he's not killed, so he's left buried in the rubble for thousands of years, unable to wake up, but also unable to die. After that, it jumps forward to modern times, about 10 years after Days of Future Past. And during this time, things are looking pretty good. Xavier is teaching at the school, and all the students are flourishing under his tutelage. We've got Mystique out in the wild, saving mutants who are being persecuted by humans, and helping them find safety, either by getting fake passports and stuff, reporting to the Morlock Caliban, and getting papers off him, or some of them are ending up at Xavier's school. In addition to that, we get to see Magneto, and he's gone to Poland, and he's actually found a sort of peace. He's married, and he's got a child, and he's living a very peaceful life, just working to supply for his family, and things look pretty good for him too. Now, unfortunately, the peace does not last. Magneto accidentally reveals his powers in public, and because of the prejudice and suspicion of his colleagues, his wife and child end up getting killed in a very, very upsetting scene. It's a truly tragic scene for the character, knowing that this character has gone through so much already, then finally got something back for himself, and then losing that as well. And it's very well played out, this scene. Very emotional, and truly a turning point for Magneto. It sends him down a very dark path. At the same time, Apocalypse ends up getting woken up by things too complicated to explain. Basically, a sunbeam wakes him up. If you want to know more, watch the movie. Now, when Apocalypse wakes up, he's not too impressed with what he sees in the world. Basically, what he sees is the strong mutants have been subjugated by the weak humans, and this is the antithesis of everything he believes in. He really wants the strong to rule the weak, and for only the strongest to survive, and to cull out those who aren't fit to serve him. So seeing the world in this state, he decides that it's time to take action. So he starts going around, rounding up the strongest mutants he can. He finds his 4 horsemen, basically finding Magneto shortly after his family's died, and helping him sort of grab hold of his anger and hatred and use that to truly unlock his power. And then he also recruits Storm, Angel, and Psylocke. The 4 of them very willing to help him, and each of them getting their powers augmented by Apocalypse. So during the course of these events, Apocalypse discovers the existence of both Charles Xavier and Cerebro, and he knows that he can use these 2 things together to actually take over the world. So this leads to an epic scene where Xavier is actually using Cerebro, trying to find Magneto, and he stumbles across Apocalypse's consciousness, and Apocalypse immediately lashes out and takes control of Cerebro, and Xavier is unable to get out of it. So this leads to a very tense scene where Apocalypse takes control of Cerebro and uses it to take over people around the world, turning them against one another, starting the launch of all the nuclear arsenals, and ultimately Cerebro has to be destroyed to protect the planet. After this, Apocalypse and his horsemen attack the X-Mansion, and during the course of this, both the X-Mansion and the X-Jet are destroyed, and the X-Men are left with nothing. Even Xavier is taken prisoner and transported away by Apocalypse. So after this, the race is on. The X-Men have to use the strongest among them to go after Xavier and try and save him. And this culminates in an awesome action scene with some truly epic fights between different characters. You've got some truly epic fight scenes. You've got friends turning against friends. You've got redemption of certain characters, losses on both sides, and it truly is tense with the fate of the entire planet on the line. Every scene just gets more and more epic. The stakes keep rising and rising, and ultimately even Apocalypse is out there in the fray, fighting one-on-one with different characters. In the end, we're left with a very satisfying ending. All the characters are in very fulfilling places. There's answers to all the questions raised throughout the plot. Everything's brought to a nice, neat conclusion. I really can't fault the plot at any point. So the last thing that needs to be mentioned is the post-credits scene. It's a short scene, and basically its entire purpose is to set up the third Wolverine movie. We have a group of people turning up at the place where Wolverine was being held during his cameo scene, and they're basically cleaning up, and one of the people there gets a hold of a vial of blood that is clearly Wolverine's, and it's then put into a case that has a label on it that says Essex Corporation. Now, for anyone familiar with the franchise, they know that the name Essex is particularly important because it ties to a character called Mr. Sinister. Now, this is quite a big X-Man villain. He's turned up in a lot of the games, in the comics, in the cartoons. He was the main villain of the Deadpool game, although I don't know how seriously to take that in the canon. But this is a big villain, and it's long overdue for him to start turning up in this franchise. So obviously with Mr. Sinister on the scene, he's known to occasionally tinker with genetics in certain ways. So him getting hold of a vial of Wolverine's blood leads me to think that the third movie is going to feature either a clone of Wolverine of some kind or somebody augmented with his powers. So we could possibly be looking at X-23, maybe a reimagining of Lady Deathstrike. She was the lady from X-Men 2 who had the nail claws instead of the Wolverine claws. So possibly they're going to try and reimagine her, or maybe they're going to go the route of introducing Wolverine's son, Daken. Possibly. Either way, it should be interesting to see what this third Wolverine movie is going to be about, what it's going to feature. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm definitely on board to see what's going to happen with that character for Hugh Jackman's final outing. So that was X-Men Apocalypse. I'm going to say it again, this movie was incredible. It gives me everything I want from an X-Men movie and more. Not only is it a great comic book movie, it's a great action movie as well. I'm definitely going to be going to watch this in theatres again, and if you get a chance to go to the cinema to see it, please do. Show your support for this. If you're a fan of the X-Men, you owe it to the franchise to support this movie. We definitely want to see more movies like this being made. This is definitely one of the better comic book movies out there at the moment, and I would even go so far as to say that it's better than most recent MCU offerings. Even Civil War, I think it's better than that. I saw that last week, and I would rather watch X-Men Apocalypse again. So here's to more X-Men movies in the future with Bryan Singer at the helm. I truly think he's brought it back to form, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he can offer us next. Anyway, I'm going to leave this review here now. My final thoughts are, it's an excellent movie, you should go see it. I would definitely rate this 9 out of 10, if I had to put a number on it. It's definitely worth seeing again. I'll be picking it up as soon as it comes out on DVD, and this is a movie I'm going to enjoy for years to come. So those are my thoughts on it. My name is Fainmaca. I am a film fanatic, and this has been my review of X-Men Apocalypse. I'll see you guys later. Fainmaca.